Did you know that the earliest record of Grenache Blanc in South Africa dates back to 1964 when Sarvis records that the Neatvoer base station imported the cultivar for research purposes. But if you read a book called Vine Diseases in South Africa by S.J. Du Plessis, you'll see that there are reports of the grapevine being planted in South Africa as far back as 1947. Now, regardless of the uncertainty about its historical beginnings in South Africa, one thing we can be certain of is that it was bottled and sold commercially as a cultivar wine for the first time in 2003 by winemaker Jean-Vincent Redon for his Signal Hill range of wines. Now, this is all relevant because today's hand drink solar wine of the day is the Bosman Fides Grenache Blanc Skin Contact 2019, made with fruit from the hot region of Wellington and vinified by winemaker Natasha Williams, who has her own range of wines called Lily from Saaren wines, which are very worth hunting down. As a producer, Bosman Family Wines are an absolute leader in the areas of social responsibility and in cultivating the well-being of their team. It was in 2009 that they performed the biggest land reform transaction in South Africa's history when they handed over a 26% stake in Bosman Adama Wines, which is the company through which all Bosman wines are traded. They also happen to be the biggest fair trade wine producer in South Africa. And above and beyond the fair trade stipulations, they also contribute further premiums directly into the Bosman Adama Foundation. This foundation is controlled by members of the community, and they can then apportion those funds to any projects that they choose that they feel will best uplift the economic and social conditions of the community. And then aside from the foundation, there's just so much that Bosman Adama does as a company for the community. There are schools, there are childcare facilities, there are housing schemes, and there are healthcare facilities. Bosman Adama seems to be one of the very few producers that really grasp that human sustainability is absolutely core to any ideas that we might have about economic sustainability or environmental sustainability. Now, there are a lot of producers who will be very happy to talk long and loudly about their environmental schemes or the organic certifications that they might have, but they have far less to say about the steps and measures that they've taken to improve and enrich the lives of the people who work for them. Bosman appear to be the exact other way around. But that said, they are no slouch on the environmental front either. They have 10% of their vineyards currently organic certified, which is 32 hectares roughly at the moment of their 320. But beyond certification, they're far more concerned with developing broad-scale, real-world applicable solutions to be able to farm in a regenerative fashion, which means essentially able to farm in a way that leaves the soil and the biosphere in a richer, healthier, more diverse state than they found it. I make this distinction between organic certifications and regenerative farming, which is a little harder to define, simply because there are many producers who will adhere to all the stipulations required by a certain organic certification, regardless of whether or not those stipulations and farming practices actually improve the soil health or increase the biodiversity of that particular area. Bosman, as a producer, is far more concerned with outcomes-based audits. What difference are we making in the environment and to the people, rather than a sort of input-focused audit system that says you have to use these chemicals and these methods, regardless of the outcome in your unique biosphere. When I asked Cellar Master Corlia Fourie what she was excited about for the future, her answer revolved almost entirely around developing solutions for being able to farm regeneratively at scale. Remember, Bosman are a huge producer. As I said, they've got roughly 320 hectares under vines across 3 large wine-producing regions. So when they're coming up with solutions, they have to think big. The upside of all that is when they succeed, when they find solutions, they have paved a far broader road down which other producers can follow them. One of the interesting projects they're working on now is the development of a compost tea plant. This is essentially a big factory or brewing site where they produce kiloliters and kiloliters of liquid compost, which they then feed directly into their irrigation lines, which drip into the soil around the vines. And this goes a long way to developing microbial diversity and health in the soil. Now, this doesn't solve the entire problem, but it does achieve something that many producers really struggle with. And there's so much other stuff that they're doing, but we just don't have time to cover it now because we have wine to drink. Bosman Fides Grenache Blanc skin contact wine was produced for the first time in 2013 as a sort of happy accident, as Corlia Fourie describes it. What happened was that at the end of a very long day in the middle of the 2013 harvest, the team realized that they had not managed to fully press all of their Grenache Blanc grapes, and they had about a ton left over. And Corlia said, well, we can do that in the morning, and they all called it a night. But when she came into the cellar the next morning, the aromas that were coming out of those Grenache Blanc grapes as they slowly started to ferment were just so intriguing that she made a decision right there and then to keep the grapes aside and ferment them on their skins with the hope that perhaps it would develop a lovely blending component. But as the fermentation continued, those aromas and even flavors got better and better until it became absolutely obvious that this wine had to be bottled as a 100% skin contact Grenache Blanc. That was 7 years ago. Today, we have the 2019 vintage in front of us. And in that time, this wine has gathered more than its fair share of critical acclaim. And this particular vintage managed to score 93 points in Tim Atkin's 2023 South African Wine Report. Now, when we get into the wine, you may discover inadvertently that serving temperature is really important, because if you've chilled this right down to a cold white wine temperature, you will get the surly immediate nose of perhaps shoe polish and beeswax, and even a touch of paraffin. Now, this should be no surprise, because we know that this wine was fermented on the skins for as long as 3 weeks, which means there was plenty of time for those smoky phenols to be extracted into the final wine. This is also why it's a great idea to decant skin contact wines, because if you find some of those smoky, unfamiliar, heavy phenols overwhelming you, letting the wine breathe a little bit allows those to blow off and allows the next wave of aromas to emerge. In this case, well, it's a sort of lovely mix of citrus and stone fruit, apricots and peaches, but then also this sweet herbal, almost honey bush element. And when we give the wine a sip, well, we find a very similar experience on the palate. There are the lovely fresh elements of peach fruit, apricot, citrus, and again, it's a bit of a herbal complication that runs through it all. But then there's also a lovely tannic, grippy texture to it all. So those savory phenol elements, along with the fruit that I mentioned and the tannic grip on the end, makes this an enormously complex and engaging wine. And there's even a slight touch of white pepper in there as well. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. But if you have any questions about skin contact wine or about Bosman, then drop a message on the site and I'll try and get back to you. And if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon and subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos every single month about wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising and pioneering winemakers within the South African wine.